In the next few years, the entire world could change because of a single mistake made in silence. No warning, no declaration of war, no dramatic countdown. Just one miscalculated move in the air or at sea, and suddenly the two most powerful nations on Earth are pulled into a conflict neither side truly planned for. In 2025, tensions between the United States and China have reached levels not seen since the Cold War, but this time, the rules are different. Decisions are faster, weapons are smarter, and mistakes spread globally in seconds. What once took days to escalate can now explode in minutes. And that is exactly what makes this moment so dangerous. China has been steadily projecting power across the Indo-Pacific, unveiling new warships, testing advanced aircraft, and conducting near-constant military drills around Taiwan. In 2024 alone, Chinese forces entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone more than 3,600 times, a clear signal meant to exhaust defenses and send a political message. The United States, meanwhile, has responded through alliances rather than direct confrontation. Military coordination with Japan, South Korea, and Australia has intensified, trade restrictions have tightened, and American submarines and naval groups are making their presence impossible to ignore. On both sides, the message is the same: we are ready. Yet behind the displays of strength, communication channels are thinning, trust is eroding, and the margin for error is shrinking fast. Unlike past rivalries, this standoff exists in an era of instant global communication and automated military systems that do not wait for diplomacy to catch up. A radar glitch, a nervous operator, or a misread maneuver could trigger responses that spiral beyond control. The question is no longer whether the United States and China could clash, but how easily it could happen. At Global Focus, we've analyzed the most realistic flashpoints where posturing could turn into open conflict, not through intent, but through escalation. One of the most dangerous arenas on the planet right now is the South China Sea. This vast stretch of water has become a daily test of nerves, where Coast Guard vessels armed with water cannons and reinforced hulls engage in constant standoffs. China claims nearly the entire sea through its so-called nine-dash line, a claim rejected by international law but enforced through relentless maritime pressure. The United States regularly challenges these claims with freedom of navigation operations, sending destroyers through contested waters to signal that no single nation controls international seas. Meanwhile, countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia find their fishing fleets harassed and their sovereignty tested almost daily. A real conflict here wouldn't begin with missiles. It would begin with something far more ordinary. A resupply mission to a remote outpost. A Coast Guard maneuver gone wrong. Imagine a Philippine vessel heading toward Second Thomas Shoal, where troops are stationed aboard a deliberately grounded World War II-era ship. Chinese Coast Guard cutters move in to block the route, as they've done many times before. But this time, a high-pressure water cannon strike damages the ship's steering. The vessel drifts helplessly, cameras rolling, as the incident is streamed live across social media. Within minutes, public outrage erupts. Under intense domestic pressure and bound by its mutual defense treaty, the Philippine government calls for immediate assistance. American naval forces in the region divert toward the scene. China interprets the move as escalation. More ships arrive, not to de-escalate, but to assert presence. The sea fills with Coast Guard cutters, naval destroyers, maritime militia vessels disguised as fishing boats, and surveillance aircraft circling overhead. In such crowded waters, stability becomes impossible. All it takes is one sharp turn. A collision, a warning shot fired too close. A radar system misidentifying intent. Automated defenses activate. A missile is intercepted, confirming fears of attack on both sides. At that point, Chinese commanders face a critical choice: back down and lose credibility over territorial claims, or press forward. History suggests pride often wins. What follows is no longer a standoff, but the opening moments of a war no one officially declared. Submarines begin tracking each other. Carrier groups reposition. Aircraft scramble. Allies are pulled in not by choice, but by obligation. The conflict could end quickly if one side overwhelms the other, or it could drag into a prolonged regional war if China's anti-naval systems perform as intended. The terrifying truth is that this entire scenario could begin without a single deliberate act of aggression. This is what makes the South China Sea so volatile. There are no clear rules both sides accept, no minimum distances that are truly respected, and no effective crisis hotline that guarantees calm decision-making in the heat of the moment. Every patrol, every maneuver, every show of force is a gamble. And the stakes are global. And this is only the first scenario. The most dangerous flashpoint of all lies just beyond the horizon, where pressure has been building for decades and time may finally be running out. The next flashpoint is far more dangerous because it is not accidental. It is deliberate, calculated, and deeply tied to national identity. Taiwan is the one place where a US-China conflict would not be a misunderstanding, but a test of resolve that has been building for generations. For Beijing, Taiwan is not just a political issue. It is the final chapter of a story China believes it must finish. Reunification has been framed as a historic mission, directly tied to Xi Jinping's vision of national revival by 2049. In that narrative, failure is not an option, and delay increasingly feels like defeat. For Taiwan, the situation has changed dramatically over the past 3 decades. In the mid-1990s, most Taiwanese still identified as Chinese or partly Chinese. Today, that identity has sharply declined. Younger generations increasingly see themselves as distinctly Taiwanese, with support for eventual independence climbing every year. This generational shift makes peaceful reunification less likely with each passing election. Time, once seen as China's greatest ally, may now be working against it. For the United States and its allies, Taiwan is not just about democracy or political alignment. It is about geography and technology. Taiwan sits at the center of the first island chain, a strategic barrier that limits China's access to the open Pacific. Even more critical is its semiconductor industry, which produces the vast majority of the world's most advanced microchips. These chips power everything from smartphones to fighter jets, artificial intelligence systems, and global financial networks. If China were to gain control of this industry, the balance of power in the world would shift overnight. As the mid-2020s approach, pressure is building on all sides. American arms sales to Taiwan have accelerated, including advanced anti-ship missiles, air defense systems, and drone technology. Many of these systems are scheduled to become fully operational by 2027. At the same time, China is facing internal challenges that complicate its long-term strategy. Population decline has already begun, driven by decades of the one-child policy and changing social norms. The property sector, once a major pillar of the economy, is struggling under massive debt, economic growth is slowing, and public confidence is more fragile than Beijing would like to admit. In this context, Chinese leadership may begin to view the Taiwan question differently. Instead of waiting patiently, the logic could shift toward urgency. But rather than launching a full-scale invasion, which would be enormously risky and costly, China's most likely move would be a blockade. A slow, suffocating strategy designed to force Taiwan into submission without triggering immediate war. It would begin quietly. Massive military exercises announced without clear end dates. Naval vessels forming loose rings around the island, close enough to intimidate but not yet stopping traffic. Shipping companies grow nervous. Insurance rates skyrocket. Some routes are quietly cancelled. Chinese Coast Guard vessels begin stopping and inspecting commercial ships under newly declared safety regulations. Cyberattacks intensify, targeting power grids, banks, communication networks, and semiconductor facilities. Life on the island becomes harder, more uncertain, more expensive. At some point, the line between pressure and blockade disappears. Taiwan's economy begins to suffer. Global supply chains feel the shock almost immediately. The United States faces a choice it has tried to delay for decades. Officially, it maintains strategic ambiguity, but in reality, allowing Taiwan to be strangled without response would destroy American credibility across Asia. Washington announces it will escort humanitarian and commercial convoys to ensure access to the island. This is where the real danger begins. Every convoy becomes a potential flashpoint. Chinese forces may attempt inspections. An American escort refuses. Shots are fired to compel compliance. A missile locks on, even if it is never launched. The situation escalates faster than diplomats can react. Within days, naval forces from both sides surge toward the region. Japan and South Korea open their bases to U.S. forces. China prepares strikes against regional military infrastructure. Taiwan activates its defenses, mining ports and targeting blockading ships. At this point, the conflict is no longer just about Taiwan. It becomes a broader struggle to dismantle each other's military capabilities. Submarines hunt carriers. Airfields are targeted. Satellites are threatened. In the chaos, Taiwan's leadership may threaten to shut down semiconductor production entirely, a move that would send shockwaves through the global economy and force every major power to take sides. This scenario is exceptionally difficult to prevent because Taiwan sits at the intersection of pride, power, and technology. Even changes in Chinese leadership may not diffuse it. In fact, uncertainty over future authority could make decisive action more likely, not less. Waiting does not guarantee peace. It simply shifts the conditions under which conflict might erupt. And while Taiwan captures most of the world's attention, it is not the only place where a single incident could trigger disaster. Far to the north, a cluster of uninhabited rocks holds the power to pull three major militaries into direct confrontation. Those uninhabited rocks are known as the Senkaku Islands in Japan and Diaoyu in China, and despite their small size and lack of permanent population, they represent one of the most volatile fault lines in East Asia. On the surface, they look insignificant, barely rising out of the East China Sea. But politically and strategically, they sit on top of massive economic and military stakes. Japan administers the islands and considers them unquestionably Japanese territory. China claims them as historically Chinese land. And crucially, the islands fall under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, meaning any armed attack would obligate an American military response. What truly raises the temperature is not the land itself, but the water surrounding it. Control of the islands extends control over a large exclusive economic zone. That zone allows fishing rights, undersea resource exploration, and strategic maritime positioning. Potential oil and gas reserves beneath the seabed make the dispute even more attractive. For both China and Japan, allowing the other side to dominate these waters would mean surrendering economic opportunity and strategic leverage. Unlike some other regional disputes, encounters around the Senkaku Islands involve highly professional forces. Japanese Coast Guard units are modern, disciplined, and backed by one of the most advanced navies in the world. Chinese law enforcement vessels operating in the area are increasingly large, heavily armed, and often supported by PLA Navy destroyers over the horizon. These are not irregular militias or civilian boats. These are state-backed forces trained to operate under pressure. The spark could come during peak fishing season, when hundreds of vessels converge on the area. Japanese patrols attempt to push Chinese fishing boats out of what Tokyo considers its exclusive zone. Chinese Coast Guard cutters escort those fishermen, insisting they are operating legally. Tensions rise. Maneuvers become tighter. Radio warnings turn sharper. One aggressive turn, one engine failure, or one misread intention is enough to cause a collision. Once that happens, escalation is almost automatic. Both sides call in reinforcements to secure the area. Japan issues formal diplomatic protests and public warnings. China refuses to retreat, framing the incident as Japanese aggression. The original dispute becomes irrelevant as warships arrive to protect commercial vessels. The presence of so many armed platforms in a confined space makes the situation extremely fragile. A warning shot intended to signal resolve could be interpreted as an opening strike. If missiles are fired, even accidentally, the conflict widens instantly. The United States would be drawn in under treaty obligations. American bases in Japan become active nodes in the fight. Chinese forces prepare to target those bases. What began as a fishing dispute becomes a regional war within hours. This scenario is particularly dangerous because it involves actors who are confident in their professionalism, which paradoxically increases the risk of escalation. Each side believes it can control the situation right up until it can't. Yet maritime clashes are not the only way a war could start. The sky above the Pacific is just as crowded, and far less forgiving. Unsafe aerial intercepts have already brought the United States and China close to disaster before. In 2001, a Chinese fighter collided with a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft, killing the Chinese pilot and forcing the American crew to make an emergency landing. The crisis nearly spiraled out of control even in a slower, less connected world. Today, the same type of incident would unfold under far more intense pressure. U.S. surveillance aircraft regularly fly in international airspace near China, collecting intelligence on military activity. China routinely intercepts these flights, sometimes professionally, sometimes aggressively. Fighters fly dangerously close, attempting to intimidate or signal dominance. At the same time, China conducts extensive aerial operations around Taiwan, often pushing the limits of airspace boundaries. Both sides insist they are operating legally. Both accuse the other of provocation. Now imagine a close pass goes wrong. A moment of turbulence, a misjudged maneuver, or a pilot pushing too far to impress superiors. Two aircraft clip wings at high speed. One crashes into the sea, the other makes an emergency descent. Within minutes, Video footage floods social media. Nationalist outrage explodes on both sides before any investigation can begin. Rescue operations are launched, escorted by military assets. If the downed aircraft lands on contested territory or near a military base, the situation becomes even more explosive. Each side accuses the other of hostile action. Commanders request authorization to protect their forces. Warning shots are fired to keep the opposing side at a distance. And once weapons are discharged, the political cost of backing down skyrockets. Even without a crash, accusations of interference or harassment could trigger a response. Modern military doctrine emphasizes rapid decision-making. Automated systems track threats in real time. A radar lock might be interpreted as an imminent attack. Defensive systems respond automatically. What begins as a maneuver meant to intimidate could end with missiles in the air. Adding another layer of danger is space. Satellites are now critical to navigation, communication, and targeting. Any interference with them is treated as a serious escalation. Reports of satellites maneuvering suspiciously close to one another have already raised alarms. Accusations of space-based sabotage would introduce a completely new domain of conflict, one with no clear rules and enormous consequences. The final scenario is perhaps the simplest and the most terrifying: a naval accident at sea. Modern warships routinely operate close enough to photograph each other's decks. These close encounters are designed to assert presence and test resolve. But they leave no margin for error. A U.S. destroyer conducting freedom of navigation operations might find itself shadowed by a Chinese cruiser. Both are under orders not to yield. Small course adjustments begin. Each captain waits for the other to blink. A sudden steering malfunction, unexpected wake turbulence, or miscalculated turn brings the ships dangerously close. Metal scrapes metal. Alarms sound. Both sides call for backup. Security zones are declared around damaged vessels, and those zones overlap. Crews misinterpret routine damage control as preparation for boarding. Warning shots crack across the water. A missile is launched in response. And just like that, a global war begins not with a plan, but with a mistake. What ties all of these scenarios together is not aggression, ideology, or even strategy. It is proximity. Two great powers operating in the same physical and digital spaces, with competing interests and shrinking margins for error. None of these situations begin as acts of war. They begin as routine operations, patrols, exercises, inspections, and demonstrations of presence. The danger lies in how quickly routine can turn into irreversible. Modern military systems are designed for speed. Sensors feed data into algorithms. Algorithms trigger alerts. Alerts demand decisions. And decisions are often made by people who have seconds, not hours, to respond. In the past, crises unfolded over days or weeks, allowing diplomats time to intervene. Today, information spreads globally in real time. Public opinion forms before facts are verified. Political leaders feel pressure to respond immediately, not cautiously. Social media amplifies every incident. A collision, a warning shot, or an intercepted aircraft is no longer a classified report reviewed behind closed doors. It is a viral video viewed millions of times within minutes. National pride becomes entangled with incomplete information. Backing down starts to look like weakness. Escalation becomes the safer political option, even when it is the most dangerous strategic one. This is why miscalculation is now the greatest threat to global stability, not because leaders want war, but because systems, doctrines, and public expectations are aligned toward rapid response instead of restraint. A defensive action by one side is interpreted as an offensive move by the other. Automated defenses react faster than human judgment. And once weapons are used, even unintentionally, every following step becomes harder to reverse. The timeline also matters. Many analysts point to the mid to late 2020s as the most unstable period. China's military modernization is accelerating. The gap in certain capabilities is narrowing. Taiwan's defenses are strengthening, but not yet fully integrated. U.S. procurement cycles are still catching up to strategic demands across multiple regions. Leadership transitions loom in multiple capitals. These overlapping uncertainties create incentives to act sooner rather than later. At the same time, global politics are increasingly fragmented. Alliances are strained. Trade wars reshape economic priorities. Conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East consume attention and resources. Each crisis reduces the diplomatic bandwidth available to manage the next one. A confrontation between the United States and China would not occur in isolation. It would pull in allies, disrupt global trade, and reshape international order in ways that are impossible to fully predict. And yet, despite all this, war is not inevitable. Every one of these scenarios contains moments where different choices could slow escalation. Clearer rules of engagement, better communication channels, agreed minimum distances for ships and aircraft, crisis hotlines that are actually used, transparency measures that reduce paranoia instead of feeding it. None of these solutions are perfect, and none eliminate competition. But they buy time, and time is the most valuable resource in a crisis. The challenge is that restraint rarely makes headlines. Avoided wars do not trend. De-escalation does not generate viral clips. But history shows that the most dangerous moments are often those that barely register until years later, when we realize how close the world came to disaster. The United States and China are not destined to fight. They are destined to interact. Whether those interactions lead to competition, coexistence, or conflict depends less on grand speeches and more on how small moments are handled when tensions are high and clarity is low. A fishing boat collision, a radar lock, a warning shot, a satellite maneuver. These are not dramatic events on their own, but in a system stretched thin by mistrust and speed, they can become sparks in a room filled with fuel. The question is not whether mistakes will happen. They will. The real question is whether the systems built around these powers are designed to absorb mistakes or amplify them. Whether leaders will prioritize control over pride. Whether patience can survive in an era that rewards instant reaction. As the world moves deeper into the second half of this decade, understanding these dynamics becomes critical. Not to spread fear, but to recognize how fragile stability can be when power, technology, and human judgment collide. The future will not be shaped by a single dramatic decision, but by countless small ones made under pressure. And that is why these scenarios matter. Not because they predict the future, but because they reveal how easily it can slip out of control. If you want to stay informed about the forces shaping global power, the risks behind the headlines, and the stories that explain not just what is happening but why it matters, make sure you follow Global Focus. Subscribe, stay curious, and stay aware, because in a world moving this fast, understanding is no longer optional.